We are live now.
All right. So yes, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Jairo Garcia. I reside in Atlanta, Georgia, the ancestral land of the Cherokee, Muskogee, and Chickasaw people. And today, I want to honor them as past and present custodians of this territory. I am the Executive Director of Urban Climate Nexus and lecturer in climate policies and sustainable cities at the Georgia Institute of Technology at Johns Hopkins University. My area of expertise are in urban sustainability and climate change. I had the big honor tonight to talk about this topic, the use of GIS systems in climate vulnerability assessments. And with me are Defley, who's going to join us in a minute. He's the sustainability officer with the city of Atlanta. Nick has an academic degree in public policy, policy science, and environmental studies from the University of Minnesota. And also have the honor to have with me Yasmin Korashahi. She has a degree in public policy from the Georgia Institute of Technology. And presently, Yasmin is pursuing a Master of City and Regional Planning program at the Georgia Institute of Technology. She is graduate research assistant at the Center for Study of Women's Science and Technology. Thank you for being with us. Tonight, again, we will be talking about climate vulnerabilities assessment for cities using geographical information systems. And before they give the floor to Nick, I want to share my screen. Yes, Nick, we can see you fine. All right, can everybody see my screen? Nick, you can see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, all right, thank you. We can hear you fine too. I like to open my presentations about this diagram to indicate that at this moment, the majority of the population in the world are living in urban areas. That started to happen since 2006. And that trend is going to continue. There is a projection that by 2050, 2/3 of the entire world population are going to be in cities. According to the United Nations Habitat, urban areas are major contributors to climate change because they account for between 71 and 76% of CO2 emissions from the global final energy use, and present high concentrations of financial, infrastructure, and human assets and activities that are very vulnerable to climate change impacts. Also, the United Nations Habitat indicates that in the coming decades, hundreds of millions of people in urban areas are likely to be affected by rising of sea levels, increased precipitation, inland floods, more frequent and stronger cyclones and storms, and periods of more extreme heat and cold. In fact, the United Nations Habitat indicate that many major coastal cities with population of more than 10 million people are already under threats, as over 90% of the urban areas are coastal. To cite an example, I want to mention the city. I used to live in New York City when attending Columbia University, the Earth Institute. And since then, the city of New York has been preparing for the impacts of climate change. From all the cities of the world, I would imagine that one of the most prepared cities was New York. Unfortunately, the city officials didn't expect the intensity of what we call climate change. And this article is in the New York Times, and then it's talking about that the storm that it was, Ida storm that it was going to hit New York was mentioned to city officials, and city officials were advised to take precaution. And despite all those precautions, they couldn't protect of the floods that happened. More than 17 people died. Most of them inside the city. They were not close to the coast, which most of the resilient strategies happened, but they were inside. And the reason that happened was because the intensity of the rain that beat twice records in less than a week. So the United Nations also states that cities, while being the main cause of climate change, are also the most affected. Most cities are situated near water, putting them at risk from rising sea levels and storms. However, given the role and hubs of innovation and creativity, we also look to cities to provide us with answers. Energy building, mobility, and planning solutions and innovations in cities have the potential to deliver major emission cuts. So again, even though the majority of the problem of climate change is produced in cities, cities can be also the solution. To give you an example, I want to cite this. I originally from Colombia, and this city, Medellin, that it was back in the 1990s, one of the most dangerous cities in the planet, became one of the most sustainable cities in the world in just a few decades. And with that, it came innovation. So in order to solve the problem of mobility in the city of Medellin, where the people, the workers live in the periphery and the mountains, and they had to displace to the center of the city where the economic activity, it would take hours. But they came with the idea of courier gondolas to displace very quickly people from the mountains to the center of the city, which is at the bottom of in the valley. And then with that, they reduce commuting time from poor neighborhoods, reduce congestion and greenhouse gas emissions, and increase economic development. This is a clear example of how cities can be very innovative. And then this example is being copied in many other cities in the world, including in Mexico City, Bogota, Colombia, and many other cities around the world. I even proposing this solution here in Atlanta, Georgia, to alleviate the traffic in one of the most congested areas. So with that, as I mentioned, cities are the problem, but also are the solution. I want to give the floor to Nick Duffley, the Director of Sustainability with the City of Savannah. Nick, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Jairo, and hey, hi everyone. Good to be here with you all. I just want to take a moment on behalf of the City of Savannah and thank both the United Nations Habitat and Global Covenant of Mayors for helping put this event on. I mean, I think it's so important that we have space like this from us for all of us to learn from each other and build partnerships and continue to work towards creating a more sustainable and resilient world wherever we are. So I'm delighted to speak with you all and have the opportunity really to highlight a little bit of the great work that we are doing in Savannah. You're going to learn a little bit more from Yasmin later about the climate vulnerability assessment that she has worked on along with Dr. Garcia's class at Georgia Tech and Georgia Institute of Technology. But I wanted to take a second and give you just a little bit of background on Savannah itself, just so you have a little perspective, and then talk about highlight a few of the projects that we're working on. So yeah, thank you, Jairo. I forgot about my presentation there. Excellent. All right, so a little background on the city of Savannah. So by US standards, Savannah is a historic city founded in 1733. It is the oldest city in the state of Georgia and one of the first planned cities in the United States. It's also home to the largest national historic landmark kind of protected district. And we have great architecture in some of our homes and buildings. And it's a tourist destination. So we attract between 12 and 14 million tourists each year. So we have a very diverse population, but it's not that large. We have about 147,000 people, residents, but we also have a relatively diverse economy. So tourism, as I mentioned, is of course a big portion of our economic sector, but we also have a robust healthcare, robust military, education, manufacturing, and logistics. And we've actually been a strategic ocean port since the American Revolution in the 1700s, and are currently the third to fourth largest container seaport in the United States. We're also, as the picture shows here, we're a very low-lying coastal city. We have very deep ties to the water. It's part of our culture and our identity. But we have rivers, marshes, and ocean, and all of that is very connected to us. And a lot of our livelihood also comes from this close connection to our waterways. And over the last few decades, and especially just in the last few years, we have really witnessed more and more of the direct impacts from climate change as a coastal community and from sea level rise. That also includes more days of extreme heat than we've ever had before, more hurricanes, certainly in the last few years, and more inland flooding. So from a socioeconomic standpoint, while we do have a strong local economy, we also have significant disparities among our households and our residents. We have a chronic poverty rate of over 25%, and we've had that rate for over 30 years now, actually 35 years. And some of our lowest income census tracts have poverty rates that exceed 70%. And so much of it disproportionately impacts our frontline communities of color and most vulnerable residents, and the majority of whom here are African American. All right, Jairo, next slide, please. So I won't bore you with too much of this. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the triple bottom line framework, but I wanted to briefly highlight it because it is so important to the city's sustainability office work. And it really focuses on moving away from simply measuring impact on economic terms, but really balancing and evaluating collective impact of our work in the economy, the community, and on the impacts on our natural environment. And understanding that none of them exist without impacting others, and that the most sustainable and resilient impacts really occur when you're balancing all three of those priorities. And another name for it, as you see on the outside circles, are people, planet, and prosperity. So I'm going to share some of the various projects that I'm involved in and how we apply this framework to build a more resilient and sustainable community here in Savannah. We haven't yet achieved a lot of what we aspire to. I want to be very clear with that. So some of the projects I'm going to talk about here and highlight, we haven't realized all the tangible impacts of our work, but we do keep our intention, we keep our purpose and our direction, and building a solid foundation, building a more healthy and resilient community for all of our residents. And I also want to recognize that there are folks out there, many of you are doing important work just like this in your own communities, and you have lessons learned and success stories. And this is just a snapshot of some of ours. And hopefully as we go through, you start to see some of our common threads wherever you are that connect our work. How we really operationalize racial and social equity into our projects and promote a healthy environment and a vibrant economy. Next slide, please. All right, so here's a short summary and highlight of some of the projects. So 100% Savannah, in March of 2020, the City Council unanimously passed the 100% Savannah Renewable Energy Resolution. And this set renewable energy goals for all of Savannah. And the goal being that by 2035, all electricity consumed within Savannah will be from renewable energy sources. And that by 2050, achieving net carbon neutrality. So 100% Savannah for the city of Savannah is an ambitious initiative focused on a transition to safe, clean, renewable energy to increase economic opportunity, improve community health and well-being, and protect our natural environment. So right now, we are in the planning stage of that process, developing the roadmap for how we achieve our energy goals and that transition to cleaner, more renewable energy. One of the charges that was given by our mayor and council at the outset of this initiative was that we are as inclusive as we can be and ensure that inclusiveness in not just our planning process, but also the implementation of our clean energy plan, so that anyone who wants to participate has that opportunity to participate. So it's more than just about clean energy. 100% Savannah is really about how we engage as many of our residents, hopefully 100% of our residents, in the planning and implementation process, and that all ages, all incomes, all neighborhoods, races, residents, and businesses can help us reach these goals. So while we are still in the planning process, we do have several projects on the energy side that are moving forward. I won't go into too much detail, but certainly focused on getting more solar on city facilities, developing an energy pipeline that really focuses on equity. So recognizing a lot of our residents need minor home repair before we can move to weatherization and energy efficiency and then on to renewables, building out those programs and promoting workforce training and new economic sectors around clean energy. Next slide, please. So in the last few years, Savannah has begun to focus on building out protected on and off-street bike and pedestrian infrastructure, or greenways. On the left-hand side, you can see a concept plan. This is called Tied to Town. The city of Savannah downtown is at the top, where you see the river kind of coming into the top of the photo there. But it's essentially a 30-mile loop that will connect downtown and the Savannah River to our east and west and south side neighborhoods. And then on the right-hand side, the Truman Trail is the first portion that is currently in design and construction. Part of it's been completed. That Truman Trail section is about 9 miles long once it's completed. It connects two of our major park systems that are highlighted in orange there. And it will provide active recreation opportunities, alternative transportation for those who do not have access to reliable transportation. And it also represents a new economic development base for our community. So when that section, just that 9 miles is complete, we will connect over 800 acres of park and recreation space and 18 neighborhoods. And that building connectivity and increasing community resilience is very important for us. Next slide, please. Another great project, sea level sensors, the Smart Sea Level Sensor Program. This is in partnership with Georgia Tech, the Georgia Institute of Technology, and many other universities now, bringing in their scientists and engineers and some of our local government groups and agencies to develop this Smart Sea Level Sensor project, which establishes really a network. You can kind of see on the picture here, all the little blue dots. Those are the locations of the sensors that we have deployed so far. These are low cost, high reliability sea level sensors on tidally influenced water bodies. Prior to this project, the entire 100 miles of Georgia coast only had one sea level sensor, and that was out at Fort Pulaski on our coast here nearby. And tides really and sea levels change throughout the entire county and throughout all of any coastal area. And so the main intent of this project is to, after deploying these sensors and testing their validity, which we've done and it's going very well, now it is, how do we use this data to help inform really quick minute-by-minute emergency response in an emergency event, flooding event, or hurricane. And then even long-term, what I really want to see is how we use this data to help inform our infrastructure improvements and help build resilience in our community and where we invest our capital investment dollars in our projects. So another key component of this that I just want to highlight is a lot of the engagement we have done in our community. We work with many of our frontline communities to develop neighborhood emergency response plans using this data. And a lot of these neighborhoods have overlying barriers to their ability to respond to flooding or major storms. And that can include obviously their income, but maybe lack of access to transportation, medical issues, or mobility constraints. And so we do this work very deliberately in partnership with the residents. That's very key because many of these residents have learned to be incredibly resilient with limited resources, and they have very strong connections and networks within their community. And we are here to learn from them and have their expertise guide our projects. And that helps not only them become even more resilient with this new data, but it helps the city as a whole become more resilient. Next slide, please. So this was a fun project, Urban Tree Nursery. It's actually still going on, but in 2018, we did receive a grant award to help launch this pilot program that essentially pairs workforce development with unemployed and underemployed residents of Savannah with solutions to help reduce flood risk in lower income, low-lying neighborhoods. And so we called it Green Infrastructure to Green Jobs. You see some of the photos here of some of the ribbon cuttings and the urban tree nurseries soon after they were planted. We've got some of the pots down here, these black plastic pots that children actually from many of the public schools got to paint and put their own designs on. Getting the community involved again is I can't stress that part enough. But essentially, the purpose was to help address the impacts of increased severe flood events, slow the decline that we've experienced over the last few decades of losing our urban tree canopy, our urban forest, to development and storms, and then also build more expertise in our rising workforce around the importance of tree care. Savannah is known for its tree canopy, but it's losing it, and we're also losing our folks and our knowledge in our community around the importance of trees. So we planted over 500 native species trees that are both water and saltwater tolerant. We've raised them over 2.5 years on drip irrigation systems on these 3 properties. And now we are beginning to plant these trees permanently after they matured in low-lying areas to really help absorb stormwater in some of these lower income, low-lying neighborhoods. And we hope over time to continue to watch the study of this and see how much, as these trees mature, they can continue to absorb more stormwater and reduce structural and street flooding. Next slide, please. And then one last project I wanted to mention is through the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. It's a brownfield program. Brownfields are pieces of property that have at least the perception of some amount of environmental contamination, perhaps from an old gas station or a mechanic shop or a paint and auto body, dry cleaners. And we received a grant through the US EPA to identify and begin to really assess these properties. And that's important for a few reasons. One, obviously, is the direct environmental contamination, but it's also a major health hazard and impact when you have folks walking through these pieces of property that they don't know might be exposing them to something that's just simply unhealthy or toxic. And so we are currently working through this first grant. We are applying for additional grants in this space. And the purpose really is not just to identify these properties and assess them, but it is, of course, to clean them up. And so we are starting to apply for grants to clean up some of these properties. In fact, we have cleaned up one property just recently that was an old gas station and removed those underground storage tanks that held fuel, and beginning to redevelop, and I think this is the most important part, redevelop these properties in ways that truly meet the needs of the residents that live near and around those properties. So many of these properties, again, are in low income neighborhoods or frontline communities with sensitive populations. We are working with the community members to understand what their needs are. And as you can probably imagine, many of the requests for what people would like to see in their neighborhood are access to healthy food, access to park space and natural surroundings, access to healthcare, access to affordable housing, access to reliable transportation or mass transit. And so that's the direction we are headed with the redevelopment of many of these properties. So then finally, and this doesn't have a slide, but I just wanted to mention one other key component to our work, and that is one word, which is partnerships. And I think comes back to some of the real innovation that we achieve through conferences like this, as well as working with Georgia Tech and other universities and other community organizations. But what I can tell you for sure, my office has 2 members in it, 2 department members. We have a very small programmatic budget, but we've been able to do a lot, and we continue to do quite a bit and have a large impact compared to our size. And that is due to partnerships with various community organizations at the local, regional, and national level, higher ed institutions, businesses, and it's helped us have a much broader impact to where in the last 3 years, through these partnerships, we've leveraged over $3.5 million of outside funding and in-kind support to make these projects work. We cannot do it by ourselves. None of us can do these projects by ourselves. And I just wanted to highlight that point. These partnerships are critical to making the work we do possible and more impactful. And this includes what I'm looking forward to seeing Yasmin's presentation about is the climate vulnerability assessment that you're about to hear more about. It was completed exactly through one of those partnerships through Dr. Garcia's class and Yasmin. So next slide real quick is just my contact information. And I would be happy for you all to reach out to me, or certainly please visit our website. But I'd like to hand it off to Yasmin.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nick. And thank you, Professor Garcia. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, awesome. All right, perfect. Thank you, everyone, and good day. My name is Yasmin, and I am a master's student in city and regional planning at Georgia Tech. And the project I am presenting today is a project that I worked on as an undergraduate at Georgia Tech, titled The Spatial Analysis of Sustainability and Climate Vulnerabilities in Savannah, Georgia, Recommendations Toward Environmental, Social, and Economic Equities. And so just a little bit of background for the project. This project was conducted as part of the Sustainable Cities Studio, which was the capstone course for the Sustainable Cities minor at Georgia Tech. And our project's aim was to analyze climate and social vulnerabilities in the city of Savannah, and then to recommend sustainable solutions for those vulnerabilities. And I'm so privileged to have the opportunity to share this project at a number of different conferences and with a bunch of different organizations, and hopefully inspire others to conduct a similar project in their communities. And this project would not have been able to be finished without the help of our wonderful course instructors, who Professor Garcia is here today to present. And then we had a TA, Miss Elena Ortel, who is a graduate of the same program that I am a part of now. Here is the project cohort. We were a team of 15 students at Georgia Tech with a variety of different expertises, including policy and planning, civil, mechanical, industrial, computer, and environmental engineering, as well as economics and design. And we're also so grateful to have the opportunity to have worked with community partners, particularly because this was a project that was conducted during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic last summer. And so being able to connect with people such as Dr. Mildred McLean, Michael McMiller with the Partnership for Southern Equity, and Nick, who's presenting here with me today, was really helpful in making sure that we were accurately and effectively building something that communities in Savannah could actually utilize. And also want to thank our research partners that we worked with, Dr. Kim Cobb with Georgia Tech and Dr. Matt Cox for so graciously letting us use their data and their expertise. And so our project was guided by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and you'll see how those goals shaped our findings throughout the presentation. And the reason we chose the Sustainable Development Goals was because they are specific goals with measurable outcomes, and they concern the 3 pillars of sustainability and are also able to be generalized in a global context. And in addition to the Sustainable Development Goals, we have adapted the IPCC's framework for climate vulnerability. And according to the IPCC, climate vulnerability is a core concept that describes the degree to which a natural or social system is susceptible to and unable to cope with adverse effects of climate change, from the assessment report number 5. And it is typically measured through a blend of sensitivity, exposure, and adaptive capacity. And in assessment report number 5, the IPCC indicated that social and economic processes influence climate vulnerabilities. And this influence is represented in the diagram on the right, which indicates that climate vulnerabilities are defined as the intersection among social, economic, and environmental vulnerabilities. And we also, because we created a spatial mapping tool as part of this project, utilized geographic information systems, which are a computer system that analyzes and displays geographically referenced information and uses data that is attached to a specific location. And so as part of this project, we were not only doing a school research project, but also making sure that we can create a tool that is useful for the city of Savannah and its residents. And so we have created a series of deliverables to go with the project, which included the identification of these environmental and climate vulnerabilities, a spatial analysis tool to be used by the city and its residents, a website to display our results and our recommendations, as well as an academic report and a poster. And so to conduct this research, we divided into teams based on the Sustainable Development Goals, or the 3 pillars of sustainability, and which are the environment, social equity, and economics, as well as a design team to make sure that the project was produced and designed cohesively and it all came together in the end. And so here you can see the website that we produced as part of our project and a GIS mapping tool. If you would like to visit this website on your own, you can scan the QR code at the bottom of the screen with your mobile device, or you can go to tinyurl.com/SavannahCVA2020 to visit our website. And we also have full-length versions and full resolution image of our poster and our presentation on the website for you to view as well. And so getting into the bulk of our presentation, the first pillar of sustainability, which we explored, was the environmental vulnerabilities. And within this category, we looked at a number of sustainable development goals, which include goal number 6, clean water and sanitation, goal 11, sustainable cities and communities, goal 12, responsible consumption and production, and goal 13, climate action. And using these goals and the environmental framework, we came up with a series of maps, which include flooding, which is 5 feet flooding above high local tide, expected by 2080, as well as the location of the smart sea level sensors, which Nick explained in his presentation, as well as groundwater and drinking water pollution levels, greenhouse gas emissions and air quality, the urban heat island effect intensity, and tree canopy cover. And so here are two examples of maps that were created under the economic framework. First to the left is flooding map, and then to the right is the urban heat island effect. And you can see on the urban heat island effect, the areas which are more dense and bright are more likely to have hotter temperatures. And then here is a layering of one of those maps, the flooding map, with other maps produced by other parts of the project to look at different spatial comparisons of environmental vulnerabilities. So on the left, you can see that projected flooding and poverty. And so areas with higher concentrations of poverty, which are the darker orange color in the map, also tend to overlap with areas that are more susceptible to flooding. And then on the other map to the right, you see a similar effect where areas that have a larger percentage Black or African American population are also more susceptible to overlap with areas of a higher flood risk. And so the environmental team identified a number of problems that would face the vulnerable areas in Savannah, and these include marginalized communities, particularly communities of colors that have a disproportionately are more disproportionately located in areas susceptible to flooding. These communities are oftentimes not included in the conversation regarding development, as well as their needs in an environmental context. We have systemic barriers such as environmental racism that lead to marginalized communities facing these issues, as well as areas that with a higher poverty zip code are also more likely to be unable to be resilient against these problems. And so the team identified a series of solutions that exist within Savannah and elsewhere, particularly in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, where it is also an area that is very highly susceptible to flooding. And so in Rotterdam, they actually use a bunch of different engineering concepts and infrastructure solutions to develop a series of levees to protect their city. And if you want to explore this solution and other solutions presented in my presentation, you can view them in greater detail on our website. And again, in Rotterdam, they identified these series of recommendations that we have also presented for the city of Savannah, which include education, engineering, and implementation of different projects to mitigate flood risks in high vulnerability communities. And so the next framework that we're looking at for this project is social vulnerabilities, which is the next pillar of sustainability. And these include SDGs 1, no poverty, 2, zero hunger, 3, good health and well-being, 4, quality education, 10, reduce inequalities, 11, sustainable cities and communities, and 13, climate action. And so you can see that this actually had the highest number of maps. And that's because it's really, really hard to capture all of these social vulnerabilities in a single map. And so we presented analyses of food insecurity, which included percentage of population in food deserts, access to grocery stores, and percentage of population receiving supplemental nutrition and assistance programs, which is the USDA's supplemental food program provided to low-income families, as well as maps of crime by concentration by precinct, maps of educational access and public school performance, housing affordability, flood evacuation safe zones, which in the city of Savannah are public libraries, as well as percentage of Black and African American residents in each census tract. And so here are just a few examples of the maps produced by the social team. And so looking at these, there's from the left to the right, there's housing burden, racial ethnicity makeup, and percent crime by precinct. And then here is an overlay of what a map that represents food deserts would look like. And so on the left, you can see that we've overlaid a map of low income census tracts, as well as on top of it, the orange dots represents access to grocery stores. And so you can see that census tracts that have lower income are more likely to be far away from grocery stores. And the map to the right on this slide is SNAP. And again, when you look at these maps side by side, you can kind of start to see patterns emerging. And so areas that have a larger racial minority population are also areas with higher unemployment rates, are also areas that have a higher household cost burden, and are also tend to be areas that have a higher groundwater pollution risk. And so on the map on the very right, the blue area signifies high groundwater pollution risk, while the green area signifies groundwater that is less likely to be polluted. And so an identification of the problem, as I mentioned before, is that African-American and Black communities in Savannah have the highest risks of housing burden and unemployment, as well are being prone to groundwater pollution. And so currently, the city has a number of actions to address these issues, but there's always room for improvement. And so we present a series of recommendations, which include recommendations towards making housing more accessible and more affordable, providing different series of infrastructure such as childcare and eviction prevention to lessen the burden on families, as well as sustainably using groundwater to make sure that the water supply in these areas remains clean and accessible. And so our final set of sustainable development goals that we looked at focus on the economic pillar of sustainability, and these include goal number 1, no poverty; goal number 7, affordable and clean energy; goal number 8, decent work and economic growth; goal number 11, sustainable cities and communities; and goal number 13, climate action. And using these goals as a framework, we developed the following maps. First, a map of unemployment by census tract, a map of poverty by zip code, a map of flood insurance need, a map of small businesses throughout the city, and a map of energy burden. And so here on the left, you can see energy burden by census tract, and on the right, you can see poverty by zip code. Excuse me, and you can see the areas that have a higher energy burden are also likely to be in areas that have a higher poverty level. And then, so the economic team found these findings with their analysis, and they found that areas of high business density within the city of Savannah are experiencing varying degrees of flood risk. And so there are some areas, if you look at the purple circle on the map, that have a very high business density. So there's a gray on the map, and they're experiencing high flood risk. And so they're at need for more levels of flood insurance. And there's other areas throughout the city that are at lower levels of flood risk. And so based on the area of risk these businesses feel businesses are susceptible to, there needs to be action taken by the city. And so here's an example of something that is being done in New York City, which is to boost the infrastructure of businesses in the lower Manhattan along the water line to make sure that they're prepared in the case of a flood. Similar thing is happening in the city of New Orleans. And there are existing actions within the city of Savannah, but of course, obviously, always room for improvement. And so we propose a series of actions to be taken by the city to make sure that businesses are well prepared in the case of climate disaster. And that includes community-led collaborative mitigation methods, making the information usable in easily accessible formats, creating residential housing measures to better protect business owners and residents of the city, as well as making sure that everything that is being done is economically feasible for both the city and its businesses. And then by applying the 3 dimensions of sustainability, we are able to approach vulnerability through the framework of the United States Sustainable Development Goals. We're able to identify, spatially analyze, and recommend solutions towards addressing areas most pertinent to at-risk communities in Savannah. And so our environmental spatial analysis revealed disproportionate climate impacts, such as flooding, on communities of color in Savannah. This analysis showed a strong correlation between marginalized communities that live along the 2 rivers that border the city of Savannah, the Savannah River to the north and the Ogeechee River to the south, and the likelihood of high levels of flooding in the coming decades. Our social equity analysis revealed that the Black community in downtown Savannah has the highest rate of housing burden and unemployment in the area, and is prone to groundwater pollution and financial stressors, and poor living conditions can cause environmental challenges that affect these communities more severely. And our economic analysis revealed that high business density areas are exposed to high degrees of flood hazard vulnerabilities, with pluvial flooding compounded by sea level rise being the common looming threat faced by businesses in all areas. And just to summarize all the recommendations we present, we recommend that the city create outreach programs to educate and empower citizens about climate risks and adaptation, to keep investing in flood prevention and recovery, to keep monitoring the water supply and identifying alternative sources of clean water, to produce incentives for businesses to implement climate risk reduction measures, to create more affordable housing, to create housing safeguards such as eviction prevention assistance, to adopt employment assistance programs, and to work on climate adaptation and provide childcare assistance. And with that, I want to thank you for your time, expertise, and commitment to climate change and sustainability, and invite you to once again scan this QR code or visit the website provided to check out our project in more detail.
Thank you, Jasmine, and thank you, Nick. The other point I was trying to mention with this project in Savannah is that all those maps are accessible to anybody with the internet connection. So you go to the website and then you can select the map that you want to look at it, and then you can overlap other maps, and then you can do some kind of visual spatial analysis. But as Jasmine mentioned, is a wide range of information. The idea was not, even though we did the some kind of analysis that we worked very closely with the Partnership for Southern Equity and with Nick, we did some analysis and we made some recommendations. But this tool is basically designed to everybody, specifically the community in Savannah, to go there and look at and sell that information. All that information is open for everybody with an internet connection. So that can empower the community in Savannah to look at risk, assess vulnerabilities that we might have not seen, and then the respective measures and approaches. With that, I would like to open the floor for questions. Anybody has any questions in the audience? Checking the chat. So I want to mention also that tomorrow, when we have a fantastic session with the mayors of North America, it's called a mayor reception, North America Mayor Reception, and the mayor of Savannah gracefully accepted to speak live tomorrow. It will be a great privilege. I met him once during the last Georgia Climate Conference in Jaco Island, and he's a fantastic speaker. And then I recommend you all who is here in this talk to attend tomorrow the North America Mayor's Reception with other invitees are Mr. Al Gore, the mayor of Atlanta, the mayor of Tampa. But we are looking to hear from the mayor of Savannah, which is a tremendous speaker who really is passionate about the problems of climate change in Savannah and the risk that Savannah is confronting for being a coastal city that is susceptible to sea level rise and groundwater, as Jasmine mentioned, groundwater contamination and storms, right, being the Atlantic Ocean. Any other comment? Any other question?
I did want to say I did hear from a few folks who are watching, but they were sent to a YouTube link, so they may not be able to interact the same way. So I just wanted to say that as well.
So they are watching this in YouTube, but
some folk, it sounds like some people are. So again, with our contact information, hopefully, if anyone has any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them. You can just reach out to me by email.
Absolutely. Thank you for the clarification, Nick. So I want to ask a final question. So Nick, you have been quite a few years. You have observed how the transformation of the city. You have been participating in so many fantastic initiatives for the city of Savannah, and then you see this transition of the city of Savannah to 100% clean energy. So how confident do you feel that the city of Savannah, or in general humanity, be able to tackle the problem of climate change and greenhouse gas emissions?
Great question. I will say right now I am legitimately quite confident. And I think there's a few reasons for that. One is that I do feel like we are truly, if it was just climate change, that we were talking about, I would say I'm not as confident. But we are at an intersection, I feel, with social equity, racial equity, understanding, and really witnessing and experiencing the true disparities, not just in Savannah or the United States, but around the world, the disparities economically. And I think we are beginning to realize the negative impacts of that kind of disparity in wealth and disparity in just having your fundamental needs, human needs being met. And I also think, so that I believe calls attention to a lot of things, and people are starting to stand up and represent themselves differently. And so that makes me optimistic, because we're not going to get through this if everyone just kind of sits there and watches the water flood over you, right? I mean, this is truly, everyone has to jump in at whatever point they can. And the other piece that I think certainly has had an impact here in Savannah is the direct impact of seeing more frequent, strong devastation from climate change. In 2016 to 2019, Savannah had 4 hurricanes and 3 mandatory evacuations in those 4 years. We thankfully were not hit very hard by any of them. We had some downed trees with Matthew, we had flooding with Irma, but outside of that, and those weren't small by any means, and certainly there was a lot of damage, but none of those were direct hits. But they brought the awareness back to the social consciousness of folks, and I think people started asking questions about that. I also think, there were a lot of costs associated where people had to evacuate who had no economic ability to evacuate, and then they had to stay out of the city for a certain number of days or weeks, perhaps, and couldn't afford that. And so it really brought other components of our vulnerability into focus, and then overlap that now with a year and a half of COVID and worldwide pandemic. And thankfully, Savannah has not had a hurricane where we had required a mandatory evacuation in last season or this season. But what if we had? And that is very much, I mean, where would people go? How would that work? And that has really, I think, brought to focus for elected officials and leadership, especially, how truly vulnerable we all are if we don't step up and start making change here. And Savannah, if you would ask me a couple of years ago, Nick, is Savannah, are we ready to take this pledge and move towards 100% renewable energy? I would have said maybe 10 years away. But things shift quickly, especially in elected office, and that happened here. And the community stepped up and made this an election issue, and held all of the elected officials to account when they pledged to support this. And all of our council members, I'm very proud to say, have continued to unanimously support not only the resolution, but the movement towards development of our roadmap, all of the work that we are doing to not only talk about doing this, but really practice what we preach. And the city is starting to invest real dollars, and will continue to in each subsequent year, into really making this transition, and not just for our own operations, but promoting that in the community. So for all those reasons, and I can't leave out youth either. I'm sorry this is such a long answer, but the youth in our community, the Greta Thunbergs of Savannah, they are starting to stand up, right? They are starting to really call attention to this, and they are influential. And they are here to make change, because they are our future leaders. They are the ones who are going to have to inherit the world that we leave behind. So I am very confident.
Thank you so much. I love your answer. Very inspiring. Thank you so much. A very quick question before I go to Yasmin. Did you have to evacuate yourself, or because you work for the city, you had to stay?
For Yasmin?
No, yes, Nick. Do you have to evacuate when they evacuate the city? Do you have to go somewhere, or you have to stay?
I thankfully, we only have a critical workforce that stays behind. We actually have a large shelter designed to withstand a Category 5 hurricane. And so those key folks who are our water utility will put in some of our local power company contractors, police, emergency responders. Those are who stay, up to about 300 to 400 folks potentially. They stay, and then they clear the path after the storm. But I keep thinking at some point, the powers that be are going to start to see, oh, sustainability is a critical service that we need to have here.
Yeah. So where did you go when you had to evacuate? Did you go far or you go?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, I have family kind of up the coast, and dodging a hurricane while going up the coast can be a little risky as well. Sometimes we've had to shift our direction, but Asheville, North Carolina, or Raleigh, Durham, we have family in both of those areas or friends, and so yeah, we actually have a minivan. We got that simply for our evacuation vehicle because we were having storms every year, and it's like, okay, we can't all fit in a Prius right now. So
yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you. So Yasmin, I want to ask you, you are representing the new generation, and you are getting very involved in climate change, and then you took the sustainable cities a minor, and then you keep getting your education to working with cities. So what are you taking about climate change for your generation, and what are your expectations for the future? How optimistic or pessimistic you are?
I think that there is still time, right? Climate change is like a very large scale systemic issue that we have to start thinking about in a big systems sort of way, right? So if we look at it at the individual level, like me or you or Nick or any other just individual person is not going to be able to make a big impact. But if every city in Georgia or every city in the United States or every city in the world takes the initiative to put forth action and policies regarding climate change and increasing the resilience to climate vulnerabilities and climate disasters in the upcoming years, I think we will be able to make a difference. But we are running out of time, and we do need to start acting now and start acting fast.
So are you optimistic?
Yes, but I'm realistic too.
And thank you so much. I want to open the floor again for anybody who want to ask any question. Any question from the technical team? Do you have any questions from the internet or something? All right. So if we don't have any questions, then I would like to say thank you. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Yasmin, for taking your time. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for give us hope. It's a pleasure working with you two, and count with your passion and your dedication, and it's just a great honor to be working with you, and it's a fantastic opportunity for the city of Savannah, the city of Atlanta, for the entire planet to count with people like you that are dedicated to this enormous effort that the scientific community is telling us is the biggest threat of humanity is the climate change issue. So thank you again. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us tonight. And for everybody, please keep tuning the amazing conference during the rest of the week. Tomorrow morning, we have a fantastic talk about the city of Atlanta, the Urban Heat ATL. In the evening, we have the reception with the majors of North America, and so on and so forth. So please check the calendar, and then we look to see you soon, and have everybody a wonderful rest of the day, rest of the evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Are you with the technical support? With the
Hello.
Yes. Are you with Vaytech?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. So that's all we need to do for
Yes.
tonight?
That's
All right.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you, Jasmine. Bye.
Have a nice day.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.